Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, especially on a little bit of a short notice. We still have a few people joining, so we'll get started here shortly. Well, again, welcome to everybody who's here. We are really glad to have you. Thank you for spending your Friday afternoon with us for a little bit. A couple of housekeeping items. We are recording this. It will be available on the department's website as well as on YouTube. We're trying some new things that DOE has made available to us, and we're excited about using technology a little bit more efficiently to make sure that we are doing a good job being responsive and communicating well and keeping everybody up to speed on how things are going in childcare. So wanted to kind of set the stage for how this afternoon is going to go. This is going to be very informal. I dressed down a little bit, not in my usual tie as I present to such a large group, because wanted to set the stage of this being a very informal process and something that we're going to start doing a little bit more often, partly just to build the relationship with us on the regulatory side of the child care house, but also just to increase communication, right? Build a relationship, make sure that we are in a dialogue with everyone, and then also making sure that we give as many people as much time and a heads up as to changes that are going to be coming down the pike over the course of the next 6 to 12 months. So in the nature of it being a little bit more lighthearted, I came up with what I'm going to call Circle Time with Jeff. For those who are in childcare, you know, circle time is a time where we all just kind of get together and sit down and kind of talk or read, ask questions. Sometimes it's a time to problem solve with children. And usually it's kind of in the afternoon a lot of times. So wanted to set the stage by having that. So in the future, when you hear the term Circle Time with Jeff, you'll know that's a time where we're just going to kind of recap where we are and then also kind of look to the future of what's ahead. So with that, let's kind of go ahead and get started. If you do have a question during this time, we are going to use the question and answer. Basically, the two assistant directors that I have been working with for the past 6 months, Missy Courier and Mike Hoback, are going to be kind of monitoring the question and answer. Just to let those who are familiar with who we are know, we have just recently hired a new assistant director, Jessica Silva, as our operations assistant director. So in the future, you'll sometimes see one of the three of them be involved in these processes of training and sharing as we kind of go along. So wanted to take a second just to introduce myself. I have met many of the licensed childcare providers who are centers. And partly because when DOE received childcare, there's a lot that was going on in the licensed child day world. So I got a chance to kind of introduce myself to them in some trainings, and also had the opportunity to talk a little bit about how we got here, meaning how childcare licensing got to be at DOE. So let's start with that in terms of how we got here. So basically in 2020, the General Assembly passed a bill that moved the oversight of childcare from the Department of Social Services to the Department of Education. The bill, which is also known as the Early Childhood Unification Law, unified early child care education programs under DOE as of July 1st, 2021. And it also established the Early Childhood Advisory Council and required the board to adopt a uniform quality rating system. So the council, the Early Childhood Advisory Council, the ECAC, ECCAC, basically will provide guidance and informed decisions of regulatory changes to the Board of Education. So it is an advisory council to the board, and everything that's childcare related, whether it's licensed child day centers or quality or family day homes, voluntarily registered homes, subsidy, any of those regulatory things will go through the ECAC. So the ECAC can then make a recommendation onto the Board of Education. And part of that was because the Board of Education for so many years has really been focused primarily on kindergarten through 12, although they've very much been interested in and involved in early childhood education. But the law established this advisory council to kind of help them learn that process a little bit more thoroughly. So the Office of Child Care, Health and Safety is what licensing is now called under the Department of Education. And part of the reason for that is Department of Education deals with teacher licensure. So, if we use the term licensure, it can be confusing. We're the Division of Licensing. Well, is that teacher licensing or is that childcare licensing? So we've kind of come up with a little bit different name. And part of the reason for the name change is to kind of help us all understand that licensing and regulation is ultimately about protecting the health and safety of children. It's not just about a regulatory process, it's not just about oversight, but it's about helping providers provide healthy and safe but at the same time making sure that that occurs. So kind of a dual process is what licensing is being called to do. And the term I use with my staff is we are required to be more than we were when we were at social services. And that's a good thing. It's a good thing to kind of move forward with that. So ultimately, we as an Office of Child Care, Health and Safety are required to carry out the vision for early childhood education in Virginia. And part of that process is to prepare children for kindergarten. We want to be better and have a higher number of children that are ready to move into kindergarten and prepared to do that when it's time. So I want to give just a little bit about me as well, so you kind of know who you're dealing with. So really quickly, my undergrad is in education, secondary education with an emphasis in psychology and early childhood. I also have my master's in communication. So prior to working for the state, I actually was a program director at a licensed program center, ran a religious exempt child day center, started working for the state in 2000 as a licensing inspector, was a licensing administrator, worked in our home office as a program consultant, technology consultant, worked as a licensing administrator in the Central Region for many years. In 2011, we were in the process of adopting our second daughter, and I needed a little bit more home time. As many of you know, working in social services, working in childcare is a very time-demanding job. So I needed a little bit more time at home because my second daughter we adopted was 5 at the time. So I started working with the Board of Real Estate with DPOR, Department of Professional and Occupational Regulation. So still doing regulations, a little bit of a shift. 2019, came back to the Department of Social Services in the Division of Family Services. So I was a project manager for child abuse and neglect, foster care, adoption, family violence. And then in 2021, came over to the Department of Education right before licensing transitioned from social services to the Department of Education. I share that partly because it gives me a great perspective on childcare from many different perspectives. The children that we adopted have been in pretty much every single child care type that we oversee. I've had a child in a voluntary registered day home, family day home, licensed CDC, religious exempt child care center for a little bit. When she was older, we had a neighbor watch her for a little bit. So I know what it's like to be a consumer of childcare. I know what it's like to run a religious exempt child care center, a licensed child day center, and then also have the experience of looking at regulatory action and process at another state agency. So I'm really hoping, and be honest, praying that my experience will kind of help lead us, and I say us, and we'll talk a little bit more about what I'm telling staff as well as all of you as providers. We are all in this together, and we're at a really unique spot in Virginia to frame how we do childcare and early childhood education for the next 10 and 15 years. And that's a really exciting place to be. And so I really want to kind of set the stage that we are all in this together to make sure that we do what's best for the children and families in Virginia. So enough about me. Let's kind of jump right into where we're going. And that's kind of a recap of 2021, and then talk a little bit about what 2022 looks like. We cannot talk about anything, unfortunately, these days without having some sort of reference to COVID. COVID has framed how we've done a lot of things, especially how we've done a lot of things in childcare in early childhood education over the course of the last 18 months. You know, it's been tough. We've had programs that closed. Many of you have closed maybe permanently and are just now getting back into this. Classroom closures, temporary closures, working with the health department, having parents who are upset that you're not doing enough to protect children, having parents who are upset that you're doing too much. Why are you closing down? Why aren't you closing down? What needs to also be acknowledged is some of you have experienced death of family members, death of a child care worker, death of a parent of one of your children. And unfortunately, some of you may have even had children who have passed away because of COVID. So I share all this to once you know that we understand where you're coming from, and we empathize and sympathize, and we want to work with you to kind of move things forward. This has caused ongoing staff shortage. We'll talk a little bit more about that here in a few minutes. Children are stressed out. Parents are stressed out. You, teachers and staff, are stressed out. Providers, owners, boards are stressed out. Licensing staff are stressed out. The world is stressed out, and we understand that. We want to work together to move through this and figure out ways to do it safely, but also figure out ways to do it, you know, because we do understand, and you understand, we understand, childcare is essential to our society. In order for people to go back to work, we all know that they got to have childcare. And y'all have done an incredible job getting us through this, and we thank you for that, and we want to acknowledge that. Oops, sorry, I went too fast there. Want to also acknowledge some of the responses that have occurred over the past year or so. Understanding that y'all have felt alone in much of this, we've tried to help. I hear lots of great stories about the interaction that many of you are having with your licensing inspectors, and how that y'all have established a little bit newer relationship in terms of seeing the inspector not as someone who comes in as an enforcer, but someone who's a resource, someone who brings you ideas. Hearing stories about some of you calling up your inspectors and just crying and just saying, I don't know what to do, and them being a listening ear. So hopefully you're experiencing that more and more, and that we can continue to improve on that relationship and grow those relationships, because we want to be a partner with you as we move forward through this. So some of the things we've tried to do is waive fees for many of you, covering some of the fingerprint and background check costs. We'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like moving forward. Just with all the CARES grants, and they are American Rescue Plan grant. You're trying to get money in your hands just to survive. And hopefully that is working. We want to continue working with you on that. Also, some of the things that we have been able to do because of legislation is we're able to do ratio waivers for licensed child day centers and religious exempt providers who are subsidy providers. Would like to extend some of that on to others, but we just don't have the authority because of the way the code is written. But we want to continue working together, continue partnering, and then kind of moving forward out of 2021 into 2022. We've gone through a little bit of transition ourselves, and I say we as the staff of licensing, having gone from social services on July 1st over to the Department of Education. We are in the division of early childhood education, care and education. and have found that we are doing really well, that we are adapting to DOE. DOE is also having to adapt to us some. I like to use the analogy of a child who comes into a home who is in foster care, and how that child kind of adapts into the family's traditions and kind of rules sometimes, but also many families try to adapt to the child. One of the things that just kind of a funny story, when we came over to DOE, DOE had a travel policy. Whenever a staff traveled, they had to get permission and sign a form that's signed off by an assistant superintendent. So I called up the superintendent, like, hey, we probably need to talk about this. And he's like, wow. I was like, do you want 70 travel vouchers every single day? And we're on video and his eyes got real big. He goes like, no, no, no. It's like, well, then we probably need to do some little adaptation for some of the licensing inspectors and how they travel. An added stress for my staff was technology did not go all that well. In terms of the transition, one would think that transitioning from one state agency to another would have been easier, but I think staff transitioning from Apple to Microsoft might have gone easier technology-wise, because it was kind of messy. But we're doing better, we're moving forward, so looking forward to that. So talk about looking forward. Let's talk about looking forward to 2022. Where do you start in childcare with most things? And that's with the alphabet, starting with the letter A. And since so this wonderful child has already claimed the letter A, and I'm not going to mess with her and try to take that A from her, because that might not be good on my part. I want to start with the letter B, and that is background checks. So this is kind of the thing that in the midst of a staffing crisis, background checks and the delay in you receiving the results is very problematic. We know this. We're working as hard and as quickly as we can with the Office of Background Check Investigation over at DSS. We'll be talking a little bit more about background check portability in a second. But we know right now that they're looking to about an 18-day processing time for central registry checks. That means once they get it in the mail, it takes about 18 days for them to process the central registry check. The background checks for criminal background checks through Virginia and the FBI is going much more quickly. But right now, the background checks for central registry is taking a little while. Coming January 1st of this year, we will be introducing background check portability. Now, I don't have a lot of information to share right this second about it, and we don't quite have the time to do it. But over the course of approximately the next week, we'll be sending out an email to all the regulated providers saying how you can go about acquiring a portability of a background check for a staff person who has worked in another regulated program within the last X amount of time. I don't want to get into the details because I don't want to misquote them, but it will allow background people to work much more quickly in programs. So what we'll do is be on the lookout from an email from our office stating what to do and how to do it. The other thing to kind of note about moving forward with background checks is, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about NELA. It's our new licensing system. We'll probably name it something different when it goes live. But starting in February, you will be able to go online and do background check requests. Now, in terms of the speed within which they get done, that 19 days, social services is very, very quickly trying to hire more staff to help with that. But the 5 to 10 days before they start and the 5 to 10 days after they start, where things are in the mail, will be eliminated. So you'll be able to electronically apply for background checks for your staff, and then through the system kind of see when those come back. That will also allow us as licensing staff to review them online. So more about that again is going to be coming up here in the very, very near future. Before we kind of go on past background checks, there's one thing just kind of want to let you know that we're doing at some higher levels. There's 3 things that affect background checks: federal requirements, Virginia state law, Code of Virginia, and then the background check regulation itself. So we don't have much control over the federal requirements, but we do have control over the Code of Virginia and the background check regulation. So in November, the Board of Education approved a NOR, and a NOR is what's called a Notice of Intended Regulatory Action regarding background check regulation. So in other words, what the board has said to the world is, we're going to jump right into background check regulations and review them and modify them to make sure that they are what we want them to be. Currently, a lot of the regulation is dependent on the Code of Virginia. It is our understanding, and that's, you can take that as you will, anything can happen in the General Assembly with intended regulatory action, but it's our understanding that there's probably going to be some background check proposals for law that are coming up in this General Assembly. So I say all of that to let you know that we are working as best we can to address some of the systemic issues about background check regulations, always with the understanding that we do not want to sacrifice health and safety of children. But if there's an administrative burden that we can eliminate or reduce, we definitely want to explore that. And that's something we will be doing as we move forward in the next probably 3 to 6 months related to that. So let's talk about in-person inspections. Well, first of all, I was planning to go down the alphabet, A, B, C, D, and that just got too complicated too fast. So just dump that. So we're just going to jump around to a couple of different topics. So for those who are a little more anal than me, you'll notice that we're not going to be alphabetical anymore, kind of moving forward. So in-person inspections. So as some of you have noticed, we have been doing more and more in-person inspections. Part of that has to do with a couple of things. One, we are getting to the point where we have kind of developed some good safety protocols for inspections themselves. And we do know that we need to be in facilities, not only for our sake to get a better picture of what's going on to ensure health and safety, but many of you have said, hey, I like having someone come in and look and see what we're doing, just another set of eyes. Currently, what we're doing is complaint inspections. The majority of those are being done in person. Many, if not all, of the renewals are coming in person, especially if a program's coming off a provisional license or coming off a conditional license. For child day centers who have a 2-year license, that is more critical, because before we get out of that conditional period or provisional period, we really want to make sure that things are looking good before we issue those licenses kind of moving forward. Now, Omicron, game changer, possibly, likely, maybe even saying likely. One of the things that we have learned is it's best not to promise anything regarding in-person inspections. We are monitoring numbers, we're monitoring hospitalizations, how many rooms are available in hospitals. All of this is taken into consideration as we talk about moving forward to going back to in-person inspections. Also taking into effect that schools are back in person. But many of us will acknowledge schools are different than childcare, because especially when you start talking about social distancing for young children, just throw that out the window. That just doesn't happen, nor it probably should it. Who wants to social distance from an infant? I mean, the child there, I just want to go, no, I just want to hold you. So all of these are what we're taking into consideration as we move forward with this. So it really would not be wise to say it's definitely going to happen. It's definitely not. But we are looking to figure out safe ways to get back in person sooner rather than later. So we'll talk more about that, and we'll be sharing more information as we solidify it through a couple of different processes, and we'll talk about that here in a couple of minutes. So let's talk about the new licensing system. We call it licensing system, but it's for regulated providers. It will also be for anyone who needs a criminal background check. So for example, now that we're at DOE, we know that many schools need criminal record checks, whether it's central registry check or criminal record check. So this new system for new providers will go live February 14th. So instead of us receiving a paper application that many of y'all have done, they will log into the system, get a user ID, set up a password, and they will submit their documents to us. We will then review the documents and kind of take it to the next step. In February, providers will start using the portal for background checks. But many of you were not going to need to think too much about this until we fully go live in June of 2022. June 30th is our scheduled go live for everybody. Now, the process that we will be going regarding communication is we will send out an email and we'll talk again a little bit about that, but send out an email saying, hey, be on the lookout for a more in-depth email in February regarding phase 1. Then we'll have some training. We will provide training for providers so they can, this is how I log in, this is how I set up a profile, this is how I submit documentations to the Office of Child Care, Health, and Safety. This will also include subsidy providers. So it's not just those who we regulate, but also those who we oversee in terms of subsidy inspections and things along those lines. Again, just be on the lookout for these, but I wanted to give you the dates of February 14th. I'll also give you the date of June 30th. Lord willing and the creek don't rise, we'll make both of those dates, but with technology, sometimes we're just kind of crossing our fingers and holding our breath that we're able to meet those, but we're pretty comfortable that those dates are good. That's what I'm sharing with them with you now. So updated regulations. So I shared a little bit about the NORA for the background checks. And so that's a process that will happen very, very quickly. Once the NORA is signed off by the governor's office, that sets a clock that we try to meet in terms of providing regulations to the Board of Education for acceptance. For those who aren't familiar with the regulatory process, it starts once the board approves them and submits them and the governor kind of accepts them. There are several processes where you can give public feedback. So this is not done in a vacuum. The board just doesn't sign off on it and it gets signed in and there's no input. There is times where we get public input and public feedback. And so that's something that we will also share and just say, hey, want to let you know this is coming up. This is how you do it. Town hall, some of you might have visited town hall over the years. You can go to the town hall to get more information or how to submit a public comment. We are also, or the Board of Education has also already submitted a NORA for the general procedures. And these are the general procedures for licensed entities. So for those who aren't licensed, you can tune out just for a second. But for those who are licensed, there's procedures in terms of how to appeal something, how to go about getting licensed, allowable variances, all the things that guide those things, most of which are pretty strict in terms of the Administrative Process Act dictates a lot of that. So that information will be shared with ECCHS. They will kind of make a recommendation on to the Board of Education, and then it'll go through approval. It goes through the approval of Secretary, Governor, and then that will also have a public comment period where people can give feedback. We take that at DOE staff, we do any adjustments, we give it back to the board for approval, and then it kind of goes through the process. Those are the formal processes that have been started already since we've come over to DOE. Two informal processes I want to just kind of talk about for a second. The first is the Child Day Center, Licensed Child Day Center regulations. We have the ECCHS has established a work group that was set up yesterday that's going to start reviewing the Child Day Care Center regulations. There is a lot of input from DSS because they had actually come up with a draft document related to updates to the CDC standards. We are also getting input from inspectors and licensing administrators. And I want to just kind of qualify that for a second because there is, I think, a misconception out there that's worth talking about. And that is the perception that the licensing inspectors are 100% behind every single regulation. That is not the case, let me tell you. They are 100% required to enforce those regulations, but there's a lot of regulations that it's probably time to retire. The one that's I like talking about most because it gets the most buy-in quickly, and this is in Child Day Center standards, but this is something that we would be looking at with VR regulations and family day home regulations. And that is the issue of back in the day, before everybody had a cell phone, every emergency contact needed to put down their address. And the thought process was, and it happened, that if there was an issue, the police could then go to the home, wait for the parent, wait for the emergency contact, something along those lines. We are now in the day when a cell phone number would be a lot better to have for an emergency contact than the address, especially when maybe both emergency contacts also work. So if something happened in the middle of the day, having a police officer wait at an address is probably not going to happen. What would be better is to get more cell phone numbers and get more phone numbers. So part of what we want to do is we want to look at all the regulations through this lens. Is this still critical for health and safety of children? And if it's not, then let's get rid of that administrative burden. One of the things that we're doing is looking at violations. One of the most violated standards, not all the emergency contacts have addresses. So the inspectors, they're the ones that do this every single day. And so they're giving feedback of, hey, let's cut this. Hey, this really isn't very clear and it confuses us and the providers. Let's clean up those things. So that is what we will then be working with the Child Day Center work group. And then they're going to give their feedback. Hey, these are things that we're struggling with, or here are the things that you might need to move the quality needle a little bit in this area. But for the most part, the standards are just about health and safety to set up a foundation for us to think about and talk about quality. Because one of the things that we are as a division is my side of the house with the health and safety, that's our focus, but we want to increase the quality of childcare. And part of that is not only for the benefit of the children and the parents, but it also sets the stage for better results when children go to kindergarten. Like children are better prepared to succeed and move forward. So these are the things that we'll be working on and talking about from a regulatory standpoint in 2022. Once we get a good way through the licensed child day center standards, then family day homes and subsidy regs are also kind of in the queue to start being discussed by the Early Childhood Advisory Council. And then we'll be setting up work groups for that as well. So part of this is just the bandwidth issue, a lot going on. But as we go, that's kind of the plan that we're going to be working over the course of the next 6 and 12 months. And again, if you have some questions that we aren't quite hitting, be sure and put them in the question and answer. Also want to let you know that some of this stuff we don't have answers for yet in terms of timing. We just kind of have a plan. So the danger of me sharing things is I'm sharing things that I don't necessarily have an answer to, but just want to kind of be open and saying these are the things that we're thinking about. And because we're all in this together, there might be some things that y'all can share with us to kind of help us move forward in a good way. So let's talk about some other things that we started in 2021 that we're going to continue in 2022. The first is waiving the fees. The voluntary registered family day homes, some of y'all might be on this and like, my fee is not waived. Just legally, there's some things we can waive and some things we can't. And some of the things we're not waiving the fee, we're just not collecting it. But we're trying our best just to kind of, understand that most child care centers, most family day homes, most programs are really struggling right now. A lot of that has to do with staffing issues. You're not fully staffed. You can't fully be at capacity. So there's a lot of financial hardships. So we're going to try to do our best to support that as well. The other thing we're doing is the background check. We are covering those. We're not waiving them because people need to get paid to process those things. So we're covering some of those costs, and that's something that we're going to continue to do at least through end of June, first part of July of 2022. Something we'll continue to do from that standpoint there. Want to acknowledge that we are still in a learning process about how best to build a website that suits everybody's needs. A lot happened very quickly with the transition from social services over to DOE. And the website is one thing that we're playing catch up for. We're playing catch up from the standpoint of how we want to structure it now that we are kind of merging so many different things from the out-of-home care to in-home care to Head Starts and VPI. We're trying to do this. So we're in a learning process. The analogy I like to use is when my wife first and I got married, learning what side of the bed to sleep on took about a month before we could kind of work this out. Cause like, this isn't working for me. And this is, and, you know, and it's kind of like, you know, so we're partnering together with so many people trying to figure out how to move forward. And we know the website needs some work. We're updating it pretty much every week. We're updating forms because our forms need to migrate over from DSS to DOE. So we're putting them in batches on the website. So if you haven't checked out the website lately, just check in every once in a while. Hope you'll see more and more forms being put up there. We're also building out the new regulation books. We know that many people still like to have the books, although we're moving more to an electronic culture, having a book that you can give staff and keep in rooms and flip through quickly and write notes is a good thing to have. So we're building out those PDF documents that you can then print off or take to Kinko's or something to move forward, to print. Right now, we're not, I know DSS, you could buy a copy of the regulations. We're just not at the point where we can support that. Something we are going to be looking forward to, but at least getting the manuals where you can download it or give it to somebody else to print or take to Office Max or wherever to print is good. So we will be doing that. DOE is hiring another web person just to help us on the early childhood side of the house. And just to kind of put something in a little bit of perspective, DOE prior to us coming over was approximately about 130 people. We brought over 130 people from social services. So there is very much an adjustment because it is quite overwhelming bringing that many people, as well as kind of all these new programs with it. So we just ask that you kind of give us a little patience while we try to build out the website and tweak it a little bit from that. Final kind of update that I want to share, and that is what I'm going to call our communication plan. One of the things that, one of the things I tell my staff is I don't like surprises. And my staff were like, we don't either. And I'm like, well, we also need to make sure that we understand that we're sure the providers don't either. No one really likes surprises with their business or their life, unless it's a good one, of course. So one of the things I want to kind of talk about is kind of two things in terms of our methodology kind of moving forward. So in our division, we've hired a communication person to kind of help us think through how to do this better. So one of the things that I kind of I mentioned to you, my master's is in communication. One of the things that really kind of fascinates me in a industry that does a great job of communication are movie producers. So if you think about movies, one of the things that you'll kind of realize is about a year or so out, 2 years out, you get like a 30-second clip saying, this is the 50th iteration of Star Wars. Say coming, and it'll say like 12 months and just be a little clip. Then as you get a little closer, you get a little bit more information, and you get a little more information, and then you get the full 3-minute trailer to really know what you're getting. And then right before the release, they do another kind of series of announcements or something like that. So we're going to try kind of that model for our communication. And part of it is this that I'm sharing with you now. I'm kind of telling you what's going to happen over the course of the next year or so. So one of the beautiful things we have at DOE is called Gov Delivery. And basically this is a listserv that if we have your email address on file, we will add you to this list. And what we're going to do is, many of you probably heard about this webinar through the Readiness Connection. And that's part of trying to merge all the different types of childcare together, one place that we can kind of communicate things out. So what we're going to do is that's going to be our teasers that we're going to use to talk about what's coming next. So let's take the example of the background check portability or the new licensing system. So in the next probably week or so, you'll see an email in the Readiness Connection. Actually, let me back up a second. We're not doing a Readiness Connection the next Tuesday because of the holidays and things like that. But the goal will be to put a little blurb in the Readiness Connection saying something along the lines of effective January 1st, background check portability will come into play. If OBI has a website talking about this, we'd have the link. And then what we would do is we get a little closer, we'll send a more in-depth email just to those for whom it applies. And that will be like the instructions, like here's what it means to have portability. Here's who can use it. Here's the form that you need to use in order to do this. So with the communication related to the new computer licensing system, so probably mid to late January in the readiness connection, we'll say February 14th, new licensing system. A little bit after that, we'll send out a bigger email just that applies to those to whom it applies. And then the bigger email will be like, here's where you can go for training. Here's where you can go through a form. Here's who you need to contact if you have any questions. So the goal here is to use the readiness connection to let folks know what's coming in the future. A full-on email that's saying here's the details related to what you need to know. And then probably one more readiness newsletter blurb right before the event as a reminder of what's coming up. So part of that is just to be better about communication, better about transparency, kind of as we move forward. So want to just kind of wrap things up with two things. One, giving you a chance if you hadn't had a question, but you do now, be sure and put it in the Q&A so we can reach out and address that. But one of the things that we are really, really kind of emphasizing both internally to staff and whenever I'm doing any kind of presentation to any kind of childcare provider is saying two things. One, we are all in this together. It's not licensing versus providers, and providers, with quality, and health and safety is competing against quality, and quality is, we are all in this together. And many of you have to wear many different hats. I have to wear a licensing hat. I have to wear a quality improvement hat or VPI hat. I have to get a business license. I have to get approval from the health department. One of the things we're trying to do is pull all of this together so we can work more efficiently and make it easier for you. We want your attention on children. We want to establish systems that help you not worry about the other stuff. We want you focusing on children. Our ratio drops dramatically by one adult stepping into the room. So we are all in this together, and we understand on our side that there are times where safety and profitability compete. And in those instances, we need to have the tough conversations on how to move forward so that it is what's best for everybody. Putting people out of business is not what's best for children. Having providers that are super stressed out is not what's best for children. Having children that are super stressed out is not what's best for providers. So trying to establish now relationships, we can start having some of these conversations so we can move the ball forward. The other thing is we are just at an incredibly unique time in childcare in Virginia, a time that we have not seen. I can think of the 20 years that I've been doing childcare plus, I haven't seen the time being right. But the time is right where we get a chance to reset childcare in Virginia, and we are building the foundation for the next 10 to 15 years. So one of the things that I challenge all of us to do is to think along those lines and not to push things off and say, I'm just not going to worry about that. Let's worry about that and let's talk about it now so we can establish a foundation that truly moves us forward. So then 10 years, everybody else is going to say, you know what? Virginia's doing it right. Virginia's doing it right. So with that being said, I'm just going to wish you a Merry Christmas and or Happy Holidays. So whatever holiday you separate, and even if you don't celebrate a holiday, just really sincerely hope that the next couple of weeks just brings you lots of peace, lots of blessings. Hopefully some of you who have been working crazy hours, actually was talking with one child care provider the other day, and he said, I'm happy because all these college kids are going to be coming home and looking for a way to make money. And that way I can actually not have to worry about staff over the course of the next 4 weeks. And I can actually take some time off. So some of you who are family day home providers, that's not necessarily an option, but I really do hope that you can take some time just to kind of find some rest, and may your next few weeks be really full of peace and blessings. Thank you. Again, this will be posted on our website. You'll be able to watch it through YouTube as we kind of move forward. And if you do have a question still, we'll keep the webinar open for a little longer so you can ask those questions. But if you don't have any other questions, we're all set, and we wish you just a great weekend again, and happy holidays. Y'all take care.